Hi, so today I'm going to talk about the past paper from 2024. I'm gonna just focus on the unseen poetry section today. And I plan to kind of go through the poem with you first, and then I'm gonna show you how I tackle these questions. The theory of rainstorms. The rain drums down like red ants, each bouncing off my window. The ants are in grey paint, and they cried out as they hit as if their little legs were only stitched on and their hands pasted. And oh, they bring to mind the grave, so humble, so willing to be bit upon, with its awful lettering and a body laying underneath without an umbrella. Depression is boring, I think, and I would do better to make some soup and light up the cave. Okay, so first we must understand that rainstorms and red ants are basically the same thing. Red ants are the main metaphor here, the main image here. So basically, the rain is really heavy, and there's like red ants, a group of red ants running around, each bouncing off my window. They're kind of jumping up and down, and the ants are in great pain. In great pain, they're kind of in a situation here, and they cried out as they hit. Actually, it's an acoustic image related to sound. Okay, it is an image of sound. Cried out as they hit. Chop chop chop. These are the raining sound, right? But now the poet is comparing it to the cry of the red ant. And then here's something really interesting. They bring to mind the grave. So basically means the speaker, the dramatic speaker, thinks of a grave. You don't know who is dead, but you know that he thinks of the grave. Again, something quite negative, right? Just like red ants and fairy and rainstorms, all these words are kind of negative, they carry negative connotations. And then the poet talks about the humbleness, the humility, and the willingness of the grave. So basically the grave is willing to be bit upon. All those rains are kind of beating on the grave, and then the grave doesn't kind of say no to it. And there's a dead body underneath the grave. So basically that's it. That's about the grave image. And then we have the kind of stage 3 here. Depression is boring. It's kind of a group of lines about reflection, about the dramatic speaker's reflection on the rain, on his own feeling. Actually, this poem is about the inner world, how you feel and how your surroundings can affect your feelings. So basically, this poem is about this kind of theme. So depression is boring, I think, and I would do better to make some soup and light up the cave. So the poet isn't a caveman, It's not a primitive time. We're not in primitive time. So this must be a metaphor, okay? Some soup, light up the cave, is an metaphorical image, so you can't take it literally. I mean, probably he's at home and he wants some hot soup, to warm his body up. But, light up the cave isn't literal here, so be careful. Okay, basically that's the kind of close reading of this poem. So now I'm going to talk about like how you can kind of deal with it. Okay, so I have some notes here. So first, when you answer question 1, you need to think of what does it really mean by the rain drums, the musical instrument. So basically it means the weather is shit, and it rains heavily. And then, so this about the weather, the rain drums. It rains heavily, and you can see off my window it is a hint of the setting. So the dramatic speaker, not the poet, the dramatic speaker is basically at home and probably is sitting near the window, and then he sees the raining. So we have the setting here, a house, and then the outside, you have these two elements here for the setting. It rains heavily, and then you already have 2 marks. And then we have the grave here. So basically, these parts is about reality, and then when you come to the grave section here, when you come to the grave part here, so it's about the inner world, the mental world, the mind, So here's about the reality, and here's about the train of thought, basically. The dramatic speaker's trains of thought. So the situation is that he now thinks of the grave, which is negative, of course, carrying negative connotations, just as the rain. And then we kind of have a grasp of his feeling, depression. He's feeling depressed. However, he then kind of decides to do something to kind of wipe out his negative feeling. So basically, these are the key points for question 1. And then you need to locate all the similes and metaphors here. So like red and in great pains, there's kind of metaphors here. Cried out, snitched on, all these kind of things you can just copy and paste on your answer sheet. And then you need to talk about this one as well. Light up the cave is most challenging part, I think, because probably you may really think that he's a caveman, but that's not the case. Seston is a kind of modern poet, so I think the situation here is quite modern too. So it's obviously a metaphor. So probably you may wonder, why the poet writes in this way, light up the cave. Why don't you just say, turn on the light? That's way more literal, right? So here's my interpretation. I think the connotation that the word the cave carries can be associated with red ants and also rain and grave, all, these three words, these three concepts, ideas are very primitive. So at last, you may want to end with a relatively primitive idea or an object, right? The cave, So pretty much it. And now we are going to talk about the most challenging part. Question 3. So how does the mood of a speaker change perspective in the last 3 lines? So mood basically means feeling, okay? Feeling. So we have depression here. Depressed. The speaker is depressed because of what? Because of the rain, the heavy rain, and also because of the grave. Okay? So these 2 things are the things that you kind of really need to pay attention to. They all carry negative connotations. And then, how the speaker, kind of deals with it. He does something, He keeps himself occupied. He makes some soup, and lights up the cave. Probably his house. Probably a room, You also need to kind of mention the possible interpretations in your exam. You also need to point out, these 2 things are metaphors. They're not literal actions. They're metaphors. So after doing these kind of things, which kind of distract him from the depression, he feels better. He feels better because he kind of gets over the depression and he brings back his mind, because his mind was brought to the grave, So these are the references that you would like to use. Yeah, basically that's how I do it. Yeah. And this is the past paper from 2024. I hope it really helps. And I'm gonna see you very soon, because I'm going to talk about another poem in the same year in the next video.